Today's speaker, finally, is Howard Rudzinsky of Rudzinsky Associates. The title of his talk is Your Career, Strategies and Opportunities in Optics and Photonics During the Time of COVID and Beyond. Uh, Howard, I've got an edited version of his bio. He's the president of Rudzinsky Associates. And in 1984, he joined his father's company, Louis Rudzinsky Associates, concentrating on talent acquisition, recruitment, placement, human resources consulting, and search services to the optics and photonics community. Since then, he's helped hundreds of optics and photonics professionals to advance their careers, and optics and photonics client organizations of all sizes to satisfy their difficult talent acquisition requirements. His experience in optics and photonics includes all commercial, industrial, OEM, scientific, and defense applications. And he's provided talent acquisition, search, recruitment, and so forth for professionals at all levels, from technician to CEO. He has an MBA from Northeastern and a non-optics, we learned, bachelor's degree from the University of Rochester, which is which is fine with us. So what we'll do is during the talk, if you all, except for Howard, can keep yourselves on mute, we'll let him talk without interruption. And if you have questions during the talk, you can use the chat function. And afterwards, we'll look at the questions, David and I, and we might interrupt Howard if they need to be answered right away. When he's done, as usual, we'll probably just let you open your mics and have a discussion.
Fire away.
Yeah, fire away indeed. So Howard, it's all yours now. Thanks very much for coming.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter, and
sure,
and David, and Phil, and everybody who invited me here. And let me just all right. So if you stop your share, I can then share my screen and get the presentation up. Wonderful. And let's see, and we'll do that. And hopefully you all have that. And thank you for that generous introduction. Finding jobs for people in optics since 1984 just means that I'm been at it for a long time, like a lot of you, and our paths have crossed in many ways. And I'm grateful for the association and opportunity to speak in front of the New England section of the OSA. So let me just start this by saying that there is good news, everybody, and we were talking about it in the pre-chat, but there are lots of optics and photonic jobs in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and nationally. And you can, it's not too hard to find them, but essentially do a quick keyword search of optics, photonics, laser, etc. And there are 1,300 jobs that have those keywords in them just in Massachusetts, almost 500 more in New Hampshire. And if you look nationwide in the US, 36,000. If you add the word physics into those keywords, it jumps up to almost 50,000. Now, look, a lot of them are not engineers, they're technicians and manufacturing folks. But the bottom line is that we should all feel comfortable. And if you have some concern or uncertainty about yourself and your own career, there are options for you. And this is not a bad time to think about your own career trajectory, where you'd like to go, where you'd like to end up, or how you're going now. But doing a little research for this talk, I came upon some interesting stuff, and so it's interesting in the world we live in. If you think about trillions of dollars of GDP, and it's a hard number to put a mental grasp on, $87 trillion. But optics, photonics, and light-related enabled products amounted to $7 to $10 trillion most recently, about 11% of the world's economy. And so when people refer to optics and photonics as enabling technologies, you absolutely got it right. We're responsible for, 10, 11, 12% of the world's economy. And so what this means to all of us is that, as optics and photonics continue to grow and innovate, all the work that you do, have done, and are doing in your companies and organizations, this will add to that percentage of GDP as for optics and photonics. Now, so this isn't just large companies, and many of us know that there are lots of smaller to mid-size entities um, in the optic space. We all know lots of smaller to mid-size companies that grind and polish optical components, that make cool and creative software, that do all kinds of really funky stuff in optics and photonics. But if you think about younger emerging companies, and I did a quick search on Crunchbase, and if you've never taken a look at that database, it's certainly worth a gander to find out where the new money is going in optics and photonics. And right now in Crunchbase, there are over 100 companies getting money at various stages of funding, startups, emerging companies in optics and photonics. That's really encouraging. I mean, so as I look at the marketplace and where are the opportunities, I'm not going to be so limiting as to say it's here, it's there. And I don't want you guys to think, and gals, men and women, I don't want you people to think that I'm copping out here and being overly general, but there are opportunities in every segment. As an example, if you look at the optical component marketplace right now, ultra-fast lasers, ultra-fast technology has been driving the need for novel optical components and surfaces with nano and metastructures on them. And so those companies that are involved in how to make them, how to process them, how to coat them, how to fabricate them, how to measure them, are all seeing growth right now. On the laser space, you know, as many of the PhDs continue to do research in the laser space, and they advance technology in lasers, then lasers are used to advance research. And whether it's the quantum realm or LIDAR or spectroscopy or other industrial applications or even the defense space, the laser space is continuing to grow and find increasing usage in all aspects of our lives. Imaging is another area that's certainly growing, not just because of COVID, but thermal imaging, other kinds of imaging for commercial machine vision, defense applications, LIDAR, autonomous vehicles. These are all areas, and personal consumer devices as well. So, if you think about it, can you make a lens any flatter to go into a cell phone or a personal device? Answer is, yeah, you can make a meta lens. You can put a meta surface on a really skinny substrate and duplicate what we know as traditional lenses. So you start at the component, you end up at the system, you end up in imaging and consumer products. Everywhere we look and go, optics is enabling really neat stuff being done. And of course, given where we are in COVID, spectroscopy applications, measuring stuff is increasingly important, not just for COVID testing, but imagine measuring apples in an apple field, or food in a plant, or a coated surface in a glass factory. All of these kinds of measurement applications are moving and growing, and they represent opportunities for all of us that are looking at employment and the like. So just to take a quick look at some of the other applications that you all know about and work in, but displays, thinking about going from 4K to 8K and then beyond, more portable, skinnier, better. The AR VR world it uses optics, and I know personally I got an Oculus headset for my boys for a holiday gift this year, and I marvel at how amazing it is to be in an immersive technology. And optics enable this. It's part of the enablement. And so there are opportunities in that space. The medical space, I don't have to dive too deep into. because we all know how important it is in this day of COVID. I think about my clients that work in optical filters. So they have never been busier than they are now making filters for analytical instruments. So it doesn't matter whether you're making a passive optical component, a subassembly, a light source, you're making the whole instrument. Business is good. Um, Energy on the solar PV side, really interesting applications. I've been fortunate enough that my colleague, Jennifer Bunis, who works on the left coast and is a graduate of the Institute of Optics, she's on the board of Luminate. And I don't know if you guys are all familiar with the Luminate program at the University of Rochester, which is an incubator for really new, small, emerging companies, and they give out $1 million prize and several other six-figure prizes a year to encourage small emerging companies, and they provide professional and technical advice on how to scale up new businesses. One of the businesses that won the prize last year is an innovative solar company called Sun Density. And if you haven't heard of this, it's really interesting. And it's not beyond you. It's a little beyond my scope of technical understanding. But essentially, they've come up with nano particle technologies to coat the glass that is used on solar panels to more effectively match the efficiency of the solar cells. And as a result, the solar cell efficiency has gone up to 25%. So solar's kind of been stuck at that 20, 21, 22%. This company, which is an optics company, is innovating solar and PV, and really interesting growth company. As we all know, the defense space continues to be a very solid and reliable space. Obviously we have the Raytheons of the world, and we have a strong base here. Northrop Grumman used to be Adaptive Optics. We have many companies in the area that are in defense space. Defense optics is steady and will remain steady and growing, particularly for U.S. persons. And more importantly, if it's a defense application, you probably do have to be a U.S. citizen to work there for various reasons. But that's a growth area. Lighting, as I think someone mentioned in the earlier talk, UV curing, growth area. Autonomous systems, LiDARs, growth. Advanced manufacturing, taking optics to the factory floor, whether they're lasers or machine vision for sensing, test, and measurement. These are all growth areas, and all of these companies are hiring. Let me tell you one quickie about a company that I'm aware of here in the local area that is doing laser 3D printing of metal. Okay, really interesting technology. So 3D printing we most commonly associate with plastics and plastic-like materials. Well, this company's come up with a way to use 3D printing, laser-based, to fabricate metal. They're using metal as their whatever. It's a laser fusion, laser bed fusion or something. So everywhere we look, optics and photonics are driving revolutionary growth. And that means growth in a career sense for everyone who has any part or piece in optics and photonics as an enabling technology. Optical communications, silicon photonics remains a really hot area. And, look, think about Amazon Web Services. Think about the Internet of Things, the IoT, how every company and all of us rely on ever increasing bandwidth. How many of us are no longer using cable and we're streaming our audio and video services at home and we've cut the cord? We need more bandwidth. I would probably suggest there's not one of us that hasn't bought something online from Amazon or some similar. Well, they need to send information around their data storage facilities faster and quicker and cheaper. Silicon photonics enables that to happen, and those companies are growing as well. And finally, and just sort of in a quick thumbnail, quantum technology is emerging. Faster lasers. So for metrology, for sensing, for communications, for computing, they're building and making light-based computers, and this is happening, and this is ongoing. And as a result, there are opportunities for you and your career. If we take a look at where is the growth, well, the first one's pretty obvious. And by the way, so this is a thumbnail over the last 6-7 years, sort of was the best data, but this is really pretty stable for where we are now. There's continued growth in biomedical applications of optics and photonics. Defense still growing at 10% a year. Sensing and control, autonomous stuff, all growing. Advanced manufacturing, as I suggested, semiconductor processing, all continue to be growth areas. These are, by the way, these are growth areas of photonics, okay? Not just in general, but the photonics-based market segment. So before we go any further, if anyone has, and I don't see any questions as of yet about this, I want to talk to you about your own career and what you do and how to act and how to respond. And I think the first thing I can say, I want to just flip through a couple of things and get to I want to go to the end before I go back to the beginning. And that's how you conduct yourself in a conversation or an interview. And we'll get to the Zoom specifics and how to handle yourself in an interview. But more and more companies, and I don't know if you all are aware of this, are employing behavioral interviewing techniques to interview and screen candidates. And not only do I recommend to my clients that they use this, but I also suggest to all candidates that I talk to that when they prepare themselves to go on an interview, to talk to a company about an opportunity, that they answer questions like they are being behaviorally interviewed. And the behavioral interview, which I will go back to in a second, the thing to think about, and it's a one-word thing, and if you take anything away from my talk today, it's the STAR technique. And it is, what's the situation? What's the task at hand that needs to be accomplished? What action did you take? And what were the results? And so if you answer any interview questions using the STAR technique, then you're going to do well for yourself. So if you've never heard of this, or you've only heard of it slightly and don't really know what a behavioral interview is, in essence, it's not like how will you do this if you come to work for me? What do you think of this? Tell me what your strengths are. That's a traditional interview. The logic of behavioral interviewing is how you acted and behaved in a previous experience are predictive and indicative of how you're going to act and behave when you come to work for a prospective employer. And so that's the contrast. In a traditional interview, you get asked those basic strength and weakness questions we've all struggled with, and I've coached candidates for years on how to answer. But a better way to approach your own career endeavors is to think of it in a behavioral sense. Think about your career, how you've acted and responded in challenging and difficult situations, and how you've handled yourself. Okay, and I'm happy to provide a list of behavioral questions. Somebody needs them beyond what I've provided here, and these basic questions in a behavioral interview will give you some insight as to, how did you use logic to solve a problem? Give a description of an unpopular decision you made and how you defended that decision. Describe a challenging situation with a fellow employee. How did you handle it? And being prepared to answer questions like this, behavioral questions, you will be much more targeted. You will answer more directly, and you will you will be more effective in an interview situation. So how do you prepare for this? Well, you're not going to know necessarily what type of questions are going to take place, but what you need to do is look at behavioral questions in advance of an interview and think about your past career and think about your skills and capabilities. And if you haven't taken the time to do a very critical skills, capabilities, and accomplishments assessment lately, okay, maybe that's something you should sit down and do, and with a blank piece of paper, not necessarily looking at your resume, but in an outline fashion. Put together your skills, your capabilities in functional categories, subcategories, and what were the significant accomplishments in each of those skill areas that you're most proud of. And then you have the basis for referring to your background in a behavioral interview. Now, the beauty of putting together that skills and capabilities assessment of yourself, a very critical look in the mirror at who you are, it prepares you for those difficult questions you might be asked in an interview. Um, I also like to suggest to candidates that that you prepare not just a reverse chronological resume, but a functional resume where you don't highlight in a reverse chronological fashion, but you describe to people who you are and who you think you are, and you outline your skills, capabilities, and accomplishments. And at the second part of your resume, you describe where you worked and what you did in a very brief fashion. But in this way, you get to describe and highlight things you've done at an earlier stage in your career that you're particularly proud of, and you're not governed by a reverse chronology. So that's the benefit of it. But let's go back a little bit further beyond the interview stuff, and let's talk about the world of Zoom interviews that we live in now. And as we've all experienced, these are pretty obvious and straightforward. I pulled these off of Indeed to give them credit, and I have accredited them at the end of my talks to make sure that you guys don't call me out for my lack of bibliography here and giving credit where credit is due. It's important. I happen to be reading off a second screen, but otherwise I would be looking you all straight in the eye and engaging with you the same way that you would engage somebody in a face-to-face interview. Okay. I don't know if you've seen online Room Rater, but having a nice background where you are, and if your computer is powerful enough and you don't like the room you're sitting in, choose a virtual background for your conversation. Make sure you're well lit, your face is illuminated, make sure your phone doesn't beep, make sure you're undistracted, and make sure that you're paying attention to a prospective employer as if you were sitting in front of them in person. It's all important. So you can take a look at these items of how to handle yourself during a Zoom interview. It's pretty straightforward. And same thing for this stuff about what to do during an interview or before the interview of researching the company. I've kind of laid it out for you in a pretty logical fashion. There are hyperlinks here that can help you. Again, you'll note here that use the STAR method in answering questions. It is the most effective way to present and communicate your background and experience to prospective employers. It's a better way to be substantial, and that's important. List of reference, having a portfolio of your work, having PDF docs available that you could share with somebody or email them. All of these are important. Having questions that prepared that show that you've taken some time to be interested in what your prospective employer does. Basic questions. All of these things are really pretty obvious. And so I'm happy to answer anything that you care to. Certainly get dressed for the interview, even if you're sitting down in front of them, dress for success. Make sure you have the files with your interviews present, so that you can quickly put them in a chat or send it to the person you're talking to, or any document you care to share. And that first impression is important. And so what is also important is that you maintain eye contact, sit straight up, all of these silly things that we think about in face-to-face interviews matter in Zoom or web interviews. They really do. And I think part of the benefit of using behavioral interview techniques for answering questions is I found some of our clients, and you can tell me best on your end, is when you interview candidates, sometimes you're tag teaming them. Sometimes there are 2, 3, and 4 people at once interviewing a single candidate. So as a candidate, you need to be adept, agile, quick on your feet, and able to describe situations. Now, there's nothing wrong if you need to take a quick second and to think about your answer before you blurt something out. Just say, hey, listen, give me a quick second to think about that. Take 10 or 15 seconds to gather yourself and then go back at it. Okay. Nothing wrong with asking for a little extra time. The honesty and integrity portion of this quiz cannot be failed. You as an employer or as a candidate should recognize that nobody's going to hire you if there's any untruth or misrepresentation of your background. I had a situation just today with a candidate that I talked to 2 years ago, and had presented themselves to a client of ours who we are doing the screening of any candidate that comes in, whether through us or directly. And they asked us about this person, and I took a look at the resume, and I noticed that they had omitted an experience they had 2 years ago. So instantly, they've misrepresented their background and their experience. And so that's unacceptable. Aside from the fact that the person wasn't right for the position, that discrepancy in someone's background was enough to be disqualifying. So make sure that in all respects, you never misrepresent yourself. That's important. I can't highlight number 19 enough. Say you left because you had a difference with an employer. Never, ever speak negatively of either your present employer or your past employer. You can say that that we agreed to mutually part. The direction that the company or the position was going in is not what was best for my career, and I chose to go in a different direction. Regardless of whether the boss or the employer lied to you about the job, you never say such things. Okay, this should be intuitive, but you would not be surprised at the crazy things that I've heard that candidates can and do say to prospective employers. So that kind of, after the interview, basic etiquette, thank you notes. First of all, asking what's the next step? Where do I stand? Don't be afraid to ask about the next step. Never be afraid. In sales, we say it's ABC. It's always be closing. Okay. Always asking for the sale. When you're interviewing for a job or when you're thinking about your career, and I get it, these things are awkward and difficult, but never be afraid to ask what the next step is and how the process might proceed. And the personalized thank you note. It doesn't have to be handwritten anymore. It can be a quick email. It doesn't have to be a Word doc, although if you have stationery and you want to send that, a nice quick thank you note highlighting 1 or 2 reasons why they should not forget about you and think about you. That's always relevant. So what I'd like to do is talk just a little bit about sort of the new normal that we're all facing. And we had some of these questions before, and there was one question that I do want to answer that bear with me here, that somebody had asked about, what does the workspace post-COVID look like? And I think employers, Ed Frenier mentioned that, that his company is highly productive, having people work remotely. Well, there's going to be more people working remotely. But I had a particular question from someone, and I'm going to read it to all of you, and then we can talk about it. If there are any other questions that you care to answer about your own career situation, or questions about the new normal, or about how employers are handling things, I'll talk a little bit more about them. But um, this person says, I've been working in the Boston area for more than a decade. I've been an R&D scientist, working in a lab in person. Now during the pandemic, like many people, he's been working, they have been working from home, and they have been providing guidance and leadership to less senior people in the lab that he worked in. He has a significant other. They have a significant other that's considering a new career opportunity in a more remote location in the country. And they are wondering how they might negotiate with their current employer to work remotely full-time, or how they could find a new job where they might be able to work remotely most of the time. And they are willing to travel a little bit, which means they could come in. But so my answer to this question, it's an interesting question, because I think you're going to find more and more employers willing to have people who don't need to be in the office work outside of the office. And so, the question I would pose back to this person who asked me would be, um, uh, how much do you need to go into the facility, and to be effective in your job? And if the answer is not at all, um, then the answer is they might allow you to work remotely. But if you're all the way across the country working remotely, typically, I don't think that that's a tenable situation that could go on for a long period of time. So that begs the question, you've moved to a more remote location where optics and photonics is not as prevalent, and there aren't a lot of employment opportunities. How do you go out and present yourself? Well, I think you make it pretty clear in your resume that you would prefer a remote-based opportunity. And I'd be willing to bet, as we see candidates presenting themselves this way, that they're going to find more and more employers willing to do that. Now, if you're a manufacturing engineer and you're putting together lens assemblies or instruments, you're going to have to go into the plant. You're just going to have to do it. And there is a leap of faith here that many of us have had to take. As a sort of a corollary, and I hope that answers this person's question. As a corollary to this, though, I want to talk about the interview situation, because this is the first time in my life as a recruiter of 37 years of doing what I've been doing that people have been afraid to physically interview, afraid to physically go somewhere and interview. And so have I had clients hiring people remotely, never having ever spoken to them in person? Yes, I have, and our firm has, and that is happening. However, I have many clients who actually do want to sit across from a table in a socially distant, appropriately PPE protected manner, and look at somebody in their eyes and see their body gestures and how they physically react in person. And so I think candidates, you have to prepare yourself that at some level, there are going to be some situations where they're going to want to talk to you in person. Yeah. Now, as the vaccine comes out, this should be less and less a problem. But if you're somebody who has a pre-existing condition, you are more vulnerable than other people, you have comorbidities. Um, I'm finding that employers are much more understanding now than they've ever been. And so what I would like to say to everybody is that I think there's a new normal here. I think that that uh, that there are very, and please forgive me because there aren't any silver linings to this terrible disaster that we faced as a country and a nation, and the lives lost and the world's crushed by COVID. But at some level, um, companies have found that they're able to operate differently. And so what has been forced upon business, and and we are more adept at doing this because we are in technology side of business and we're more able to adapt, is is a greater allowance to let people work more flexibly. And so I think part of the new normal, the paradigm shift that we're all experiencing is there there's going to be more flexibility. And you know, we used to have many clients who were deeply entrenched, who said, I want my salesperson to come in and, every day and be in the office and be in the plant. Well, over the last decade, we found more and more smaller emerging entities in optics and photonics, and to me, that's, let's just say the $5 to $10 million a year companies that have never had a remote sales force or remote people or technical support people out in the field. They've gradually become more used to allowing that to happen. COVID has accelerated that. So I think that the future for more flexible employment is good. And I think employers, have addressed their own concern. Can we still be productive? Can we still make money? Can we still satisfy our customers? Can we still design, engineer, manufacture, build, deliver, support our products by having remote employees? And the answer is a resounding yes. I mean, I think we're all, all of us sitting here in this Zoom meeting, sort of a testament to that happening. So I think that's part of the new normal of the work world we live in. And one final thing, if before I open it up to any questions from anybody, and I want to make sure that I've addressed everything in my presentation. Um, um, if you're having trouble in your career and you need some help, I am happy to be of assistance. To you, talking to you, and just giving you general career advice or giving you my general perception about the marketplace. Now, you know what? One final thing I think that everybody's sensitive to, and that's money and compensation. Okay, during these times, and people always want to know, where are salaries and what are comp packages looking like in this market, in this environment. And I will tell you unequivocally that at some level it is a candidate driven market because really good people are in short supply. So we're not at the, if you look at, for example, the housing market wherever you are in Massachusetts is pretty good. In fact, they would say it's frothy. House prices have gone up dramatically. Well, salaries haven't gone through the roof like they did in 99, 2000, and 2001 when the telecom optics boom ran up. And new PhDs were coming out getting $95,000, $100,000 20 years ago with no work experience. So the market, except in the Bay Area, let me just sort of preface this by saying that there's crazy money being paid, to the Alphabets of the world and the Googles, the Amazons, and the folks in the Bay Area. But aside from them skewing salary data, we are in a candidate-driven market, which means salaries are competitive. Salaries are going up. We are seeing raises that are in excess of 10% to make moves. Sometimes they're in the 10 to 20% range, depending on someone's background. It's not crazy, but it's a really good time to be employed and working in optics and photonics. Your skills are in demand. There are opportunities out there, and there's a real chance for you, if you're not happy, to self-actualize, to do something a little bit different. And I would also say that to people who have been not necessarily pigeonholed, but say you've worked just for, and please, David Lees, please forgive me if you've been a Raytheon person for 20 years, and you've worked at the same company and you think you're labeled and branded an aerospace defense person only. Well, this is a pretty reasonable time to consider making an alternative move out of that. You're not. People are looking more wholly at the whole range of a person's experience and not pigeonholing them. And that's because the labor market's tight. So salaries are good, compensation is good, and there are really great opportunities in a wonderful range of emerging areas for optics and photonics people. And with that, I will stop this, get off my soapbox and on how good the market is, and open it up to any questions anybody might have about anything. Let me see if there's something here in the chat.
Great, thank you, Howard. Yeah, I can tell you that. Yeah, it's Malcolm who's Mikeless. His question is, has the increase in remote work resulted in more jobs being offshored?
Malcolm, that's really so. What I would say, some of the, I didn't want to get chart crazy today, but as I looked at sort of where the growth was, there's been a tremendous amount of growth in Asia. So salary growth and employment growth here is fairly normal, and in a kind of a tight labor market, growing economy kind of way. But you look at Asia, they're paying crazy money for people, and so and they're exploding in terms of growth. I don't, some of what I would say is, some of the optoelectronic stuff, optoelectronic components, transceivers and transmitters and laser diodes that can be made more cheaply in Asia are, but I don't see that wholesale jobs leaving the U.S. right now. I really don't. One of the things that is beneficial to U.S. To companies, I'll tell you what I'm finding. We have many international clients that are coming to the U.S. and they want to do business and do government work. And the only way you can do government work if you're an international firm is you have to be walled off for ITAR reasons. You have to set up manufacturing in the U.S. So we're finding lots of international clients coming to the U.S. and setting up a manufacturing facilities in the U.S. that are firewalled from their international headquarters and operations, so they can do business with U.S. companies that service the defense market. So I hope that answers your question.